Queens are usually women who spend their lives surrounded by honor, obedience, and flattery, right at the very top of the social hierarchy. But strangely enough, some of them were treated with far less respect once they were dead. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Catherine of Valois, the foremother of the Tudor dynasty, whose remains were subjected to shocking mistreatment by later generations and could not find peace for almost 400 years. So, leave a like and let's begin. Before we start talking about Catherine's horrifying afterlife, let's first go back and remember a little about the life she lived before she left this world. Because, oh yes, there is quite a lot to remember. As the foremother of the Tudor dynasty, a dynasty whose members, I would say, were willing to do almost anything in the name of love, Catherine herself was very much the same, and she certainly lived an eventful life. Catherine of Valois was born in 1401 into the family of the Mad King, Charles VI of France. I've already told you about his madness on this channel, including the fact that at one point he believed he was made of glass, when I was telling you about the fate of Catherine's older sister, Isabella, who had been married to Richard II as a child, but ultimately never truly became Queen of England, or managed to strengthen the alliance between the two countries. But the alliance was still needed, and now another sister had to fulfill that mission. And in 1420, at the age of 18, Catherine married the English king, Henry V, who was a full 15 years older than she was. For Henry, war always came first. So almost immediately after their marriage, he left Catherine behind and returned to his military camp. And for most of their short marriage, the two of them lived apart. Only a few months after Catherine gave birth to their son, whom they had somehow miraculously managed to conceive during one of their rare reunions, Henry V fell ill and died without ever seeing his own heir. Catherine was left a widow at just 21 years old, having been Queen of England for only 2 years. And you've probably already heard that in the past, widowhood was not necessarily the worst possible fate for a woman, because in some ways it could bring a certain freedom from social pressure and a degree of independence. But that was definitely not the case for Catherine. Parliament and the Privy Council kept a very close eye on her every move, and even passed a law stating that she could only remarry with the consent of the king, her own son. The problem, as you can imagine, was that the king at the time was still pooping in his royal diapers, which meant Catherine would have had to wait for years until he came of age. And you have to admit, for a young woman in the prime of her life, that was an extremely sad prospect. But Catherine was not the timid type, and she decided to take both her life and her love into her own hands. She began a secret relationship with a Welshman, Owen Tudor. There are several legends about how the couple first met. One of them says that, while drunk, he stumbled during a dance and fell straight into her lap, while another claims that the Queen once saw him bathing naked, and that the charms of his body managed to make quite a special impression on her. But the truth was probably much simpler. Owen really was a handsome man who happened to be constantly around a young and lonely woman, serving in her household, and given Catherine's rather secluded life at Windsor Castle, it is not difficult to imagine how a spark could have appeared between them. Even though Owen came from an influential Welsh family, his status was still far too low for a woman who was a princess by blood and a dowager queen by rank, which meant that their love could never really be open. We do not actually know for certain whether the couple ever managed to marry at all, because no reliable evidence of their wedding has survived. And of course, the entire Tudor dynasty maintained that this marriage had taken place in 1430, because otherwise they would have been considered the descendants of bastards. The Privy Council was absolutely horrified by everything that was happening, because what they expected from a queen was humility and piety, while Catherine had gone off and married a man of her own choosing, and soon the couple began having one child after another. They probably had 6 children in total, although the names of only 4 have come down to us: Edmund, the future father of Henry VII, Jasper, Edward, and a daughter named Margaret. It is very likely that multiple pregnancies and childbirths took a serious toll on the Queen's health. She began to fall ill, and even went to Bermondsey Abbey for treatment, but nothing seemed to help. In her will, Catherine wrote that her final months had been spent in grievous sickness, which she described as a long and painful state of anxiety and sorrow. She died on January 3rd, 1437, at the age of just 35. And you would think that after such a turbulent and eventful life, Catherine would finally be allowed to rest in peace after death. But this is exactly where the truly shocking part of her posthumous story begins. As was customary at the time, her body was embalmed shortly after her death. The internal organs were removed to slow decomposition, and the empty cavity was filled with herbs and spices. The body was then wrapped in a shroud, a thick fabric coated with wax and covered with sheets of lead. This entire bundle was finally placed inside a wooden coffin. Her late husband, Henry V, had undergone essentially the same procedure. A special effigy was also made for Catherine's coffin. At the time, it was traditional during royal funerals to place a wooden figure representing the deceased on top of the coffin, dressed in the person's own clothing. Catherine's effigy has, almost miraculously, survived to the present day and is still kept at Westminster Abbey. Because of that, we can at least for a moment imagine what Catherine herself may have looked like. Painted in realistic colours, the effigy shows the Queen with grey-blue eyes, a long neck, and a charming tilt of the head, while her figure appears tall and slender. Judging by the traces that remain, a wig made from real human hair, brown in colour, was once attached to the head of the effigy. Today, all we see on it is a painted red dress, but during Catherine's funeral, the figure was dressed in a purple mantle trimmed with ermine. In its hands were a sceptre, and rings made of gilded silver. After all these preparations, Catherine was given the magnificent funeral, appropriate for a dowager queen, despite her scandalous second marriage to Owen Tudor, and despite the shock of the young king, who had suddenly discovered that his mother had other children and that he now had brothers and a sister. Catherine found a temporary resting place in the centre of the Old Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey, practically next door to her first husband. But this was only the first burial in her story. Unlike her first husband, Catherine was not given a magnificent tomb of her own, although this was probably something her son, Henry VI, had planned to build for her. But his own life became the very epicentre of the Wars of the Roses, and like his grandfather, he was also plagued by bouts of madness. So in the end, Catherine was left without a tomb worthy of a queen. Catherine's grandson, Henry VII, the final victor of the Wars of the Roses, who took the English throne, decided to begin an enormous construction project at Westminster Abbey. His plans included demolishing the Old Lady Chapel and building a new one in its place. There he wanted to create a family burial place for his new Tudor dynasty, and in his will he even stated that he wanted to be buried close to his grandmother Catherine. During the demolition of the chapel, Catherine's coffin was discovered and removed from the ground. It turned out to be badly damaged, so her remains were taken out and temporarily placed inside a wooden chest lined with flat sheets of lead cut from the old roof of the chapel. The chest was then placed on the floor beside the tomb of her husband. Of course, Henry VII saw all of this as a temporary solution, but as we all know, there is nothing more permanent than something temporary. Henry VII died before the chapel was completed, and some of his instructions were never carried out by his son, Henry VIII. Henry VIII did not even bother to properly bury his great-grandmother, and neither did the other Tudors who came after him. So for the next 300 years, Catherine's body simply remained there without any real honours, standing beside the magnificent stone monument of her husband, which only made the whole situation more shocking and the contrast even more striking. Because the chest could be opened, over time, visitors to the abbey began looking inside more and more often, and Catherine's dead, exposed body gradually turned into a local attraction. Visitors could even be shown her remains for 1 shilling. But eventually, another tradition appeared as well, kissing the dead Catherine on the lips. The reason was that in his play, Shakespeare described Catherine as the queen who had witchcraft in her lips, and apparently many people wanted to touch those magical lips for themselves. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys described a visit to the abbey and seeing Catherine's body. On Shrove Tuesday, 1669, I to the abbey went, and by favour did see the body of Queen Catherine of Valois. and had the upper part of the body in my hands, and I did kiss her mouth. Reflecting upon it, I did kiss a queen. To be honest, I have no idea what was going through the minds of people who wanted to kiss a corpse that had been lying there for several centuries. But it seems the mistreatment of her body escalated as the 18th century passed. In 1786, Richard Gove wrote that in recent years, the young scholars at Westminster had amused themselves with tearing it to pieces. When Gough himself saw it, he reported the condition of the body as being a shapeless mass of a whitish colour. Finally, in 1778, the fate of Catherine's remains improved slightly. When the Countess of Buckingham died and the family vault was opened, they decided to move Catherine there as well, finally giving her at least a little peace. Although it is still rather questionable that the body of a Queen of England ended up, so to speak, simply tucked away inside the burial vault of a noble family. Almost like some object placed in a cupboard just to save space. It was only during the reign of Queen Victoria that Catherine finally found a proper resting place. Queen Victoria brought this kind of belated justice to quite a few unfortunate women from history, including Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Jane Grey, because during her long reign, many old historical buildings were restored and reconstructed, and as a result, some of these poor restless souls finally received at least a little respect from their descendants. When those responsible for the abbey entered the vault, they found Catherine's coffin and her remains lying on top of what was described as a pile of coffins beneath the Countess's monument. At some point, the pile had collapsed, and Catherine's coffin had fallen against a damp wall. The wood that had been touching the wall had rotted away and turned into a soft, loose mass. When a team of researchers and restorers was finally able to remove Catherine's body, they discovered that very little of it had actually survived. Most likely, bones and teeth had simply been stolen as souvenirs over the centuries. Dean Stanley of Westminster, who oversaw the entire process, made sure that Catherine's remains would finally be given a new resting place. A new coffin was made for her from thick English oak, described as being finely worked and carefully finished. Inside it, they placed fragments of the old chest, along with a plaque explaining the journey her body had gone through over the previous 100 years. After lifting the altar slab, they built a nude tomb beneath it, from grey marble with a slab of slate inside. And it would seem that our heroine had finally reached her happy ending, but even here, there were a few complications. The dates of Catherine's birth and death were incorrectly engraved on her memorial, each shifted by exactly 1 year. Her birth was placed 1 year earlier, and her death 1 year later. Although, after everything Catherine's remains had already been through, I think she was probably long past complaining, and was simply glad to finally have a proper tomb, even if the inscription on it came with a couple of mistakes. And so, almost 400 years later, after being buried 3 different times, this woman finally found peace. Of course, to a modern viewer, this whole story is absolutely shocking. Very few of us can imagine living in a world where someone might steal a tooth from a grave just to take it home as a souvenir. But for people in the past, things like this were not necessarily seen as something extraordinary. Just remember the fate of Catherine Parr's remains, whose story was in some ways even worse when her body was almost thrown out beyond the walls of the church where she had been buried. Perhaps this attitude was connected to the way people in the past viewed death in general. Mortality was much higher, people encountered death far more often, and they were simply not as sensitive to it as we are today. Catherine of Valois' life was full of adventures, both during her lifetime and after her death, and it is good to know that she finally found peace. And if you ever find yourself at Westminster Abbey, make sure to visit her. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments, and let me know if you know of anyone else who was just as unlucky when it came to finding peace after death. Write their stories below. Check that you've left a like, and I'll see you in the next video.